Good, good. Okay. So, welcome everyone. You're in the Hoboken Historical Museum. It's not, thank you very much. Yeah. We're going on like 24 years in this space, so that's pretty amazing. So, my name's Bob Foster. I'm the director at the museum, and I often get to introduce events like this, and it's really a lot of fun to see so many people in the room. I would say this doesn't happen that often that we have so many people here, so it's a real testament to the Duroy clan and family members and friends and all that. Let's hear for them. I can remember maybe, a year ago, 2 years ago, Dr. Duroy came in. I didn't recognize him because I'm used to the thicker glasses, and now he looks totally different. He looks great. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but I go, wait a second, I know the voice. Who is this guy? And he looks great. And he said that he was going to be writing a book on the theme of the Hoboken fires, and a lot of people come in and say they're going to do that topic, but there aren't that many people who finish it. So let's just give a big applause for finishing what you started. And Dr. Duroy has a long history of Hoboken. He's hanging out, I think, in South Amboy these days quite a bit, but he grew up in Hoboken, and he has been an author and a creative person besides his whole education career for many years. And digging around in the Hoboken archives, I found this publication. It's called The Miracle Mile Mirror, and there's a young Ed Duroy right here. And I believe if he's not the editor, he's definitely one of the principals. And I thought it was interesting. Here's a guy at 20 years old in Hoboken, and I'm gonna read your quote. It's a paragraph or two, but it really is indicative that even at 20, you were thinking about a lot of topics that most 20-year-olds in Hoboken, I don't think were running through their mind. So it's listed as an editorial, and this is volume 1, number 1. I'm not sure if there were more volumes after this one, but you did make it into volume 1. So here we go. This is Ed speaking. Hoboken, the Miracle Mile, a town of many people of different cultures, an industrial town where its largest industry is politics. I love it. The Miracle Mile, noted for its past history, but plagued with present deteriorating conditions, where housing is a decay, drugs are a cancer, and where dreams are shattered by realities. Yet despite these dilemmas, calamities, anxieties, and social prejudice, these are people who can take time to express their inner soul in their talents. This perhaps is the only miracle that exists in Hoboken today. We salute you, people of the Miracle Mile, for your cultures and conglomerations of cultures which make up Hoboken. 20 years old, pretty cool. That is the quote. That is the quote. So I just had to get that in. I hope it's okay. So on with the show here. I want to say that again, it's so great I love it when someone writes about Hoboken. It just gets me so excited. So I hope there's some other authors in the room that might be writing something. And we've done many book releases, but I can tell this is going to be one of our favorite ones for sure. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Adam Figueroa. Autumn, I'm sorry, Autumn. I've done that before. I was worried about the last name and I screwed up the first name. Autumn Figueroa, and she will introduce her uncle, Dr. Edwin Duroy. Let's welcome Autumn.
No worries. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, family and friends, and thank you for being with us today. A few logistics. First is on your seat, there would have been a note for the author card. As you entered, you could also get one. However, feel free to write a note to our author and drop it in the black card bin, which is on your way out. Secondly, is if there is a book purchase slip that was also with that you can write who would you like the book made out to, and afterwards, Dr. Duroy, aka my Uncle Ed, will be signing books and personalizing them. There'll be a quick Q&A to follow Dr. Duroy's remarks, and then we will also open up the refreshments, so please stay, enjoy all that the museum has to offer. So without further ado, most of you know Dr. Edwin Duroy as such. However, for me, he's my Uncle Ed. I will interchangeably use both names when referring to him, as Dr. Duroy seems very foreign to me. Even when I used to work for him, it was very hard for me to call him Dr. Duroy. Nonetheless, Dr. Edwin Duroy was born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, and moved to Hoboken as a child with his parents, his mom and dad, his mom who's 97 years old but unable to join us here today, his two brothers and two sisters, one who is here today, Alice. And they moved here back many, many moons ago. Dr. Duroy lived here in Hoboken for 52 years and has witnessed the community's transformation as well as the tragic fires of the 1970s and 1980s. During his time as a Hobokenite, he served as councilman of the 4th Ward, principal of Connor School, where I started my educational journey in kindergarten, superintendent of the Hoboken Public Schools, superintendent of the Patterson Public School District, professor, and served as council member who approved the applied development, which included the museum site, where we sit today and have the pleasure of hosting this event, amongst many other things. Dr. Duroy holds many degrees, one from Jersey City State College, Montclair State, and the University of Massachusetts-Amherst. Now, semi-retired, and I say that because he's always getting into some projects when called, even when my Titi Sam says, you're supposed to be retired. He resides with my lovely aunt, who's here in front, Santa, in South Amboy, New Jersey. What defines my Uncle Ed? It isn't all that he has done to create such a remarkable resume, but more so, the adversity he has overcome and the thousands of lives he has impacted through his generosity and wisdom. Today, we come together to celebrate yet another remarkable achievement, Dr. Duroy's first book, Befallen, the story of the tragic Hoboken fires, which took the lives of 67 residents, many children, during the years of 1973 to 1982. I have had the pleasure of growing up with such amazing role models, my Uncle Ed being one of the most influential for me for so many reasons. Jackie Robinson once wrote, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." I know that my uncle has impacted so many people, many, if not all of you sitting here today, and places he has been, and this book will continue to do just that. It has been one of his dreams to be a published author, and it is with great privilege and honor that we are here today to honor his dream while we honor those who were also lost so long ago. After his brief words, we will follow with a quick Q&A, so feel free to also grab some snacks, and without further ado, I give you my Uncle Ed, Dr. Edwin Duroy, author of Befallen.
I just need a second to set up because I do have a special introduction. Let's see if this works. No, forget about the commercial. It'll be right over. Befallen, page 2. The facts were you walked down one block and heard the music of Frankie Valli singing Sherry Baby, while the next block you heard Willie Colon playing his trombone to salsa music. Further down the block, sometimes you heard both. Hoboken was truly a conglomerate of neighborhood enclaves that had different cultures living under one roof in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. Okay. Let me get my notes together. First of all, I want to thank the museum for hosting today's event. Very generous on the part of Bob Foster and the committee and the board to be able to host this, and I thanked him very, very much. The story of Befallen is basically about a community, and the term I selected, Befallen, because it describes a community that was subjected to gentrification by fire. Now, I think it's important that I first clearly define what is gentrification by fire, and that is on page 65. Gentrification by fire, the process of changing the economic composition of a community from a lower to a higher income, affecting housing and business setting. The transformation outcome displaces residents of low-income minority groups, senior citizens, and children on a disproportional basis, with fire being its impetus. That's a term that I use again throughout the book, which is gentrification by fire, and that was actually the second title I was considered using, but in a way I was glad I selected Befallen. The book is written in an eclectic historic genre, which incorporates poetry, don't be scared, poetry, definitions, famous sayings, reportage, and my personal recollections and perception. I also use, quite frankly, creative narrative, which adds to the book the perspectives of emotion and in-depth feelings of the saga. We start off with history. And there's a lot of short history snippets in the book in the 70s, and I think that if you don't remember them, you should look them up, because it'll be quite interesting. It's not just Hoboken, because I start off with Hoboken, some Hoboken history, New York City, Boston, and some of the national events that are covered during that period of time kind of set the tone for the book. Hoboken in the 1950s had many industries. We're all aware that we had Maxwell House, Bethlehem Steel, Wonder Bread, Mighty Fine Pudding, Tootsie Roll, the vibrant shipping industry, and many, many others. However, in the 50s and the 60s, all those companies that I've named and more started leaving and left Hoboken. These companies left Hoboken with a high unemployment rate. And basically what was left also was smaller companies that included many of them garment district companies as such. But they did pay minimum wage. The number one employer of Hoboken in the 50s and the 60s going into the 70s was government. City of Hoboken, Board of Education, the Port Authority, New Jersey Transit, and the Hudson County government combined was the number one employer in the city. And it happens to be also the Democratic Party, or as we called it, the Democratic machine. That was one of the basis, or the basis for the Democratic organization in Hoboken and Hudson County, government jobs. Going back to Hoboken, post-World War II, the federal government decided to get into the housing business, and they created housing authorities throughout the country. And Hoboken also formed their housing authority, and they were able to start building these units on the most part because of the veterans, the returning veterans coming throughout the United States and their families. And they basically developed 1, 2, 3, and 4-bedroom units on the western part here in Hoboken. And believe it or not, there's also a couple of 5-bedroom units. Be fruitful and multiply. 95% of the people that moved into the housing authority, or as we called it, the projects, when they were first built in the 50s and the 60s, were low-income Italian and Irish families, 95%. And what happened was they left from their older tenements throughout Hoboken, and they moved into the projects. That left a large vacancy, and in came a new group from New York City, mainly from the Bronx and from East Harlem, and that was the introduction of the Puerto Rican community, or Hispanic community in general, into Hoboken, which was as a result of the vacancies that occurred and existed in the community. Now, the storyline of the book, because again, I created, instead of just writing a report, which I did not want to write just a report, I wanted to write a story based around what did in fact occur. And so the storyline basically occurs as a result of a young couple from Puerto Rico. They go to the Bronx. From the Bronx, they come over to Hoboken. A lot of people were exiting the Bronx at that time because of fires, because of the crime, and I always say the Cross Bronx Expressway. When Robert Moses built the Cross Bronx Expressway, he just tore through the Bronx, took over a lot of buildings and businesses, and that created a lot of people being displaced. And many of them crossed the river into Hoboken, downtown Jersey City, Newark, Paterson, Passaic, Camden, Dover, Perth Amboy, various communities that had affordable housing units. And of course, downtown Jersey City as well, if I had not mentioned that. But the story again, to go back, the young couple come to Hoboken, they have a child, and that child grows up in Hoboken. And this young lady has an interest in journalism. Now, the reason that I picked that particular character as the protagonist was very simple. Who attends these fires? Who are constantly at the fires? Firemen, policemen, and reporters. So I selected a reporter to basically tell the true story of what transpired. Again, it's a different way of looking at the fires. While in Boston, studying journalism, Delia Delgado, which is the name of the character, takes on a number of historic issues, and I'm just going to bullet them. Boston desegregation of the public schools, Watergate, Nixon resigning, 18-year-olds getting their first vote, the end of the Vietnam War, new President Ford, and a newer president, Jimmy Carter. If you're not familiar with them, look it up. So she has she writes about that. And then in 1977, she comes back to Hoboken. When she graduates, she's working for a company in New York called The Mirror. And some of us may remember the Mirror newspaper in New York. She starts off right away. Interesting. Again, another historic point. Again, if you're really interested in the history in the 70s, you gotta read the book. In July, when she starts at the Mirror, second week in July, there's a blackout in New York City. And believe it or not, over 5,000 people are arrested in New York for looting. Tens of millions of dollars in looting and damage occur during that time. This was actually the first story that she ended up covering. Second story is what was happening simultaneously. There was a very nefarious, I guess, story about an individual that was shooting people, and that was the Son of Sam. If you don't remember that, look that up. Son of Sam, from 1976 to 1977, was shooting people almost at random, usually couples. He shot close to 15 people, 15 couples or individuals, of which he killed 6. And during that time, people were scared to come out. And so she was able to write a story about that. Eventually, she was assigned to the Bronx full-time, in which she covered the fires, crime. She covered the urban renewal that existed. And the only silver lining that she covered in 1977, and that's a question I'm going to throw out. Does anybody remember what silver lining existed in 1977 in the fall? What was that? The Yankees. Unlike 2024, the Yankees won the World Series. And the relevancy or the connection there with the story is the contentious announcer. Everybody knows Howell Cosell. You remember Howell Cosell? So in the second game of the Yankee, he was able, from where he was sitting, to see beyond the stadium. 2 blocks away was a big fire in the second inning. And he just couldn't help but say, that's fire, still burning. By the way, the Yankees are winning, but he kept referring to the fire. 2 innings later, the fire is still going. And he is attributed to say, at that point, he just kind of threw his arms out. He goes, ladies and gentlemen, the Bronx is burning. That was a quote attributed to him. And ultimately, there was a book written by a fellow by the name of Mayer called The Bronx is Burning. And we also had here at the museum a presentation by a researcher from Princeton by the name of Gottlieb. I'm sorry, I forgot his first name. And the title of the book, of his presentation, was Hoboken is Burning. So there's all that connection starting off with Howell Cosell. Now, in 1977, the Mirror starts to go under. The reporter, Delia Delgado, loses her job. And ultimately, she finds a job with a local newspaper called The Dispatch. Now, many of us might remember, Dispatch was a morning paper. In the afternoon, you had the Jersey Journal, and in the morning, you always had the Dispatch. What was interesting also is the Mirror is going out of business. Ultimately, the Dispatch goes out of business, and now I hear the Journal's going out of business too. That's amazing, unfortunate again. What I want to do at this point is just do a quick chronology of the fires, because she covers it from basically 1978. But I want to take you back, because the book starts off with one of the chapters called The Food Town Fire. And a lot of people don't remember that. A lot of people don't remember. Food Town was located, those of us from Hoboken, located on 3rd and Jackson Street, specifically 307 Jackson Street. They had been there for 10 years, and all of a sudden in August 1972, they burned down. fire department does their thing, they investigate, they see that there was a torch by the office, and the initial appearance is that it was a break-in that went bad. However, in further examination, they found out that on the other side of the building, it burned as well, and there was an accelerant. So therefore, it was no longer a burglary gone bad, but rather an arson. The insurance company came in, and they did their investigation. They happened to have an affiliation with the FBI, and the FBI came in, and somebody, a person of interest, was identified. This is all true, all documented, and it appears in the book as part of his Star Ledger report. The individual happened to be from Newark, happened to be an organized crime figure, happened to be hired to burn Food Town. He ended up not only arrested, convicted, sentenced to 6 years, fined, and also the insurance company was made whole. They got their money back because of what it was. And basically the credit for solving that crime in 1972 really goes to the whole combination, but certainly because the FBI got involved. A year later, in 1973, there's a fire on 11th Street, and 11 people die in the fire. And there was no arrest, no closure, and basically no justice for those families. And the fact was, the federal government or the FBI was not involved. From 1973 to 77, you get a series of fires, small fires, averaging 1 fire a week. Now somebody says, well, 1 fire a week. But you add those up, you get 50 fires a year. And you add those up on a 4 or 5 year basis, you get a couple of hundred fires. And it's during that period of time where the gentrification by fire takes hold. That is to say that developers come in because they recognize the value of some of those tenements, and say, we want those tenements because we can make money by converting them into condominiums. And so the issue is the community starts to feel that they are targeted. They're targeted for this particular negative aspect of development. They basically start to see that it seemed as if the developers were receiving almost favorable treatment by the city. They were welcomed, and the tenants were taking a back seat on the issue. That was the perception, that was the feeling. And it also had fear and intimidation. Now, the 11th Street fire, people would say today, well, how can you say that was gentrification? There's nothing there today. It's a parking lot. So you can't point to 11th and Willow. But the fact is, people pointed to 11th and Willow to accentuate fear and intimidation. There was a young fella, and I don't see him here today. I'm not sure if Raymond is here today. But Raymond Perez lived across the street on 11th and Willow. And he was 11 years old, and he remembers looking out the window and seeing the fire. And he saw the people screaming, the scurrying, the flames, and ultimately the fire department coming in. But that was not just enough, because when I had this conversation with him last year, he was also flabbergasted that nobody was arrested. He was under the impression, as many in the community, that somebody had been arrested. His mother feared for him and his sister, and they lived across the street from the fire. So you had, during this period of time, an intimidation and fear. In 78, a person dies in the housing authority, but the housing authority buildings, the way they're built, it was contained just to the one apartment, and the fellow did, in fact, die in 78. In 79, January 20th, Hoboken experienced the worst tenement fire that we probably had seen in over 100 years or more. And that was at 131 Clinton Street and a couple other buildings adjacent. 21 people died that night on January 20th, 1979. No resolution, no justice. In 1979, also in October, a mother and a child died in a building that's, that many of us remember as the fish store, Apicella. Now, what happens is the owners of Apicella are concerned because they have a business. They have a livelihood not only for themselves, but for their employees. And they basically emptied the 3 units above them and say, no, we're afraid. We're afraid that we could experience a fire and it would destroy the business. 1980, 2 more children died, and it was only hundreds of feet from the firehouse on Jefferson Street. Many of the firefighters were distraught because they believed had they been informed of the fire earlier or sooner, they would have been able to save the 2 children that passed away. October 25th, 1981, again on 12th and Washington Street, 11 people died, again of what is considered arson-related fire. On November 21st, 1981, it looks like a month later, 2 more people die at the, what is the American Hotel over by the train station in Hoboken. 2 more people die. And in April 1982, on 14th Street, in what was a building, I recall the building, I just couldn't figure out how they would call that a hotel. It was really a tenement building, it seemed. But the Pinto Hotel, on April 82, 13 more people died. The book identifies the names, the dates, the ages of the children, and the location where it occurred, and it's all in the back. During the book, I don't put the names in other words. I do use what many of the newspapers and others, well, 13 people died, whatever. But now you have the names. And the issue with that is that is a way, I feel, I could at least attribute to recognition of those that passed away. And the names will live on in the book, in the library, and hopefully in the internet. The protagonist reporter basically covers the fires from 1978 on, and she starts to become involved because she feels, and this aspect of it, she feels for what is happening in a community. What I wanted to do was basically collect, and I did collect the feelings and understanding of what people shared with me, and I brought it into and blended it into this character. And so she feels as she's reporting this that not enough is being done. And she writes an expose. She writes a summary of what occurs, and that's in the book, the expose. And so you need to make sure that you do read it. And in the expose, she basically challenges a lot of the misnomer or the conventional wisdom that's going around about the fire. In particular, one where even elected officials and other government officials are quick to blame the victims for the fire and not take any responsibility for being unable to achieve an arrest or a conviction of any of the fires from 73 to 82. Now, I did research on the issue itself because I did have the opportunity to speak to a fire safety official. I spoke with a law enforcement official. I spoke with an insurance investigator. And in preparing some of the research, and what happens, let me just get back on track here. What happens is that these government officials are quick to blame the tenants, yet research shows that 25% of all fires in the country are arson related. And of the 25% that are arson related, it's very difficult to solve these, but 20% of all those cases are solved. Yet, from 73 to 82, none of them were solved in Hoboken. And the only aspect, the only entity that had any record of success was the FBI, and they did not show. Now, the issue with that is not that I talk out against the federal government or the FBI, is that they represented the last great hope for solving the problem. They represented the last great hope for the community, and they did not show. And the reason for that, again, the research shows, is because they were not invited. That's their answer. They were not invited, that they needed to be invited by the locals or the county people or the state, and they were not invited. And they also indicated that they were willing to come in, but they were told to stand down. These are questions that are still open regarding this period in time. Let me just read a passage, page 2, regarding the blaming of the income, and it's interesting. Those that blame the low-income families solely for the fires and fatalities suggested a false and cruel narrative. If that premise were true, then the Housing Authority and Applied Housing Authority should be in ashes, since they're overwhelmingly populated by low income and the majority being of Puerto Rican families. So it was a direct refute that appears in the expose of that comment blaming the victims. Now, in the expose, the issue is the editors don't want them to just talk about everything negative. And they say, you have to kind of throw some balance to it. Some good perhaps came out of it. And so she includes a list of people that she believes were heroes. Certainly the firefighters that ran into the fire and saved lives and saved property. They acted heroically. Policemen, some who were the first to arrive at the building, ran into the building and alerted tenants of the fires. Teachers who had to counsel students the following day or the following weekend and let them know that the youngster that sat next to them in class was not coming back, and that they had to act heroically to talk to the students. Neighbors helping neighbors, friends helping friends, and certainly families helping families. The doctors and the nurses at St. Mary's Hospital are noted in the book. And of course, the clergy. The clergy provided spiritual guidance and sometimes support to the families that experience gentrification by fire experienced losses, some of them family members, and some of them just the loss of their homes. And it was difficult for them. So I just want to segue at this point regarding, I didn't mention there were famous sayings in the book. And a firefighter famous saying is one from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now everybody knows F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby. But in the quote, the quote by the firefighter says, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, show me a hero, and I will write you a tragedy. He said, that's what exists in Hoboken. Charles Dickens, and everybody's aware of this because there's a semi-hideous commercial about the tales of two cities. And I shouldn't say that, but anyway. Let me just read the quote, Tale of Two Cities, in the book. In the beginning of the book, it reads, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of darkness. It was the spirit of hope. It was the winter of despair. That particular prose I found very profound because it had relevancy to the story. And Delia Delgado noted that in the story. Basically, it was the best of times for those that gained financially. Some landlords, developers. The city gained by having higher revenues from condominiums. And there were others that also gained from the situation. Conversely, as in the prose, it was the worst of times for tenants, low-income Hispanic tenants, and most importantly, for children. It was the worst of times. That's one of the famous sayings. I'll throw one really quickly in there. Aristotle says, greed has no boundaries. And the last one that I'll refer to is in the book, is a chapter called Jesus Wept. And it comes from the Bible, book of John, chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept because he was called to his friend's home. His friend Lazarus, and what happens is he gets there and Lazarus had died. All right? And he found Lazarus' sisters weeping, Mary and Martha. He found others from the household and the community also weeping, and he was moved, and Jesus was moved, and Jesus wept. Now that story was basically told by a priest that provided counsel to some of his parishioners that experienced loss as a result of the fire. And he said, and he closed, or it's closed, the chapter closes by saying, just like Jesus wept, we should all weep for what has transpired in Hoboken. I'm going to be closing with a few takeaways. Now, takeaways, they say, oh no, it's supposed to be the reader. You guys take away. What do you take away? I'm going to share what I take away. 3 takeaways is that the gentrification by fire affected mostly children. The majority of the 67 that are listed in the book were children, 17 years and younger. The majority of those displaced, and let me make it clear, by the thousands, were children. Now, how did I know this? Because in 1977 in the Board of Ed, we have, and we still have today, what they call the October report. Every October, you're supposed to report the number of students by grade and also by ethnicity. And so I assisted in that effort because I did have a responsibility for a federal grant. And so I was part of that whole process in the 70s. And I saw where the population had started, over 7,000 public school kids in the 70s. And all of a sudden, within this 10-year period, it was down a little over 5,000 students, which meant 2,000 students were gone. And it continues. It continues from there. Ultimately, when I left, there were less than 3,000 kids. There were 5 public schools when I first started. It went down to 1. Parochial schools. There were 5 parochial schools. They were down to 1. And so the population is mostly affected by gentrification by fire were the children. That's the second takeaway. The second takeaway, should I say, was there was no resolution, there was no arrest, no closure for the families, and ultimately you could say there was no justice. The third takeaway is one kind of an appeal, and that is we are our neighbor's keepers. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to families, to friends and neighbors, and especially those in greatest of need. Those were my 3 takeaways. I want to end by reading the poem. I said there was poetry. There's one poem. Now, I took the liberty of printing the poem, and I framed it in the hope that I can submit it to Bob and he could find a little corner someplace in the museum. The name of the poem is Fuego, which is fire. It's in the beginning of the book, and it's about the children. Fuego. The fire of tragedy burned a dream in my heart. I long for life's beauty, but will never see it. Forgotten in time, the cries of humans cease. Silence comes to those that weep no more. We have died a child's voice. Hope shattered, smoke filled, the dream tattered. Who remembers me? Who remembers me? Ladies and gentlemen, the name of the book is Befallen. Hopefully you can find a little place. Not a big deal.
No.
Okay, so we're going to take about 10 minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Duroy about the book, about the process? We'll start here, and we're going to make the response brief.
Yes, you're right.
And please repeat the question.
Yes, we will. Question?
So I have question and a comment.
So let's start with the question, my love.
I don't know if I can do that.
Right.
This is very emotional for me because I remember, when we moved to Hoboken, it was 1970. In 73, I just started Hoboken High School, and I remember all of these fires, and it was so traumatic for so many of us. And it was interesting, a lot of my classmates became firefighters and police officers because of that. And we had talked a lot about that. And one instance, we had a professor, teacher, Mr. Kylie, who, because of this collective trauma that we had, he took us to work at volunteer at an orphanage that used to be, I think, on 12th and Moonfield somewhere. And it kind of helped us to work and be with the kids, knowing that all of these kids had died. So I just wanted to share that. But I also wanted to thank you because you've done something that's genius in so many ways, because you have a historical book, but at the same time you have a protagonist that really wasn't there or didn't appear. It's almost like a novel, but it's a historical truth. And that's really hard to do So I thank you for that. I really thank you. That I had was, in all of your research, did you ever did we ever find out why there was never anybody that was convicted of this? Like, what was that about?
Again,
They want to repeat the questions, so everyone in the back can hear.
oh,
So the question
why was nobody convicted of the crime? Let me say that again. My premise is that they needed people a little more experienced that could resolve the cases, that had more ability to solve the cases and had less impediments to solve the cases. In other words, they were beyond local issue, and that was the FBI. Now, in my opinion, the FBI should have been involved for two reasons. The first one was because of the people that died during that period of time, and what happens is those crimes, the arson crimes, are felonies, and anybody that dies during a felony is a felony murder. And those cases technically are still on the books today. The second reason that I think they should have gotten involved was the civil rights. 1964, 1967, and the Fair Housing Act, all of them used the term that Americans have the right to housing absent fear and intimidation. And that's what was happening. There was a lot of fear and intimidation. Many people left Hoboken. They didn't need an invitation. They left because they felt they were targeted, and they left because they feared for their lives. In particular, they feared for their families, and in particular, again, the children. So those two aspects, I'm critical of why the federal government did not get involved, because I thought they were the last great hope. Okay. Another question? Okay, yes. I haven't done that yet, but that is something that I'm considering at this point. Again, it's my first book, so it's something that I'm looking. I'm still getting my feet wet, so to speak. Now, it's my understanding that today's presentation is being taped and will be put on YouTube. Okay, so it'll be repeated for YouTube as well. Yes, Doctor.
I want to say that I was lucky enough to have read the book because you gave it to me to read before publication. And what was very special to me was that when you read this book, you feel you are actually there viewing all these atrocities. You know, you become part of the book. And to me, that's what a good novel is. You've really invited the reader into the situation.
Very good. I'm not sure everybody heard that, but the Dr. Nadia was talking about the book. She did assist me in reading it in advance, and she mentioned that the style of the book helps the reader to become directly involved with what takes place. And that was one of the goals, quite frankly. It also, I always, as an educator, I always believe in getting people to think, analyze. That's why you get some of the definitions. For example, now in the back of the book, when you see it is fire, and there's an individual there screaming, "Fire, fuego!" And somebody said, "Well, you know it's a fire. Why do you need somebody saying fire, fuego?" And the reason for that is because there is a quote in the book. And the quote in the book says, the most dreaded words that tenants feared going to sleep at night were the words fuego, fire, because they would put their children to sleep, and that's the last that they wanted to hear, the last words that they dreaded before they went to sleep. So, another question. Yes?
So I run a magazine company called the Hudson Scholar, and it's a student-run Hudson County-based magazine. And I just love the story that you put here, and also because of the history of Hoboken. To better promote this story, could I put an excerpt, maybe the first chapter, as one of the main features, so that people could read the excerpt?
Certainly, yeah. It is, it's my understanding that it's going to be on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And eventually it's going to be, I think another week or two, it'll be also a...
#1 bestseller.
New amount of dollars. It'll be an e-book, which is actually half the price. A lot of people today use the computer to download books, and they're able, but just so you know, I can't sign a computer e-book. And yes, certainly you can use that. It's public domain as far as I'm concerned.
Last question?
Well, I don't have a question.
Yes.
Just listening to the way you're explaining, and I have not read the book, it certainly makes it more interesting now to read it. It just touches on all that you were explaining, because some of us lived it. So it definitely brought a lot of sentiments.
Thank you. I just want to recognize a couple of firefighters that are here today. A retired firefighter, Mike Turner, and the deputy fire chief, Luis Moreno.
Well, thank you all again for being here. We will now open up the refreshments. We will also start selling. And again, please refer to the slip that you can get to please fill out who you would like your book made out to. We will be signing copies and taking care of purchasing of the book up here. And please just mix, mingle, and enjoy. Thank you again for coming on out.
The parking.
Oh, and if you need parking validated, what should we do?
Sorry. Actually, just Dr. Duroy probably has the best non-professional publicist around, and that is Autumn Figueroa. Please thank her. She organized this. He wrote it. She made you get all here. Yeah. No, not underestimating. So